Great. So welcome. So today it's Dr. Robert Sinnott that I have with me, and I'm Dr. Martin Fransson. I run Welledge in the old town of Stockholm, and it's such a pleasure to have you with me. This book of yours about adaptability research, it's it's one of the best I ever come across in bringing that essence of chiropractic philosophy, the art of it. It's just wonderful. And the science, looking through the science class from the paradigm of adaptability. And you have this amazing part, the adaptability focused paradigm that we're going to take part of in your presentation today. And
yes.
You're a fellow chiropractor from US, you practice in Illinois.
Yes.
Somewhere outside.
About an hour south of Chicago.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. So it's going to be great. And you have paid a lot into the study of philosophy. You have a degree within philosophy in the chiropractic arena as well. And then this science that you're really cutting through. And it's quality research that you really looking through. What is the research showing in regards to what we can measure and what's the best way to measure and what kind of intervention, especially the scope of chiropractic. So with any further ado, I'll leave you to start telling us more about what your findings is and the great stuff that you come through.
Well, it's kind of you to say those nice things about the text and myself. I appreciate that. That text, it's what, when I write, it's a way for me to put thoughts together and kind of even myself. So it's a lot of these things are products of my own appetite for understanding. And with science, it changes so constantly because we're finding new information. Things we thought were correct, we find aren't as, there's a better way to look at it. And we just have to keep making those changes and working our way through. Most of that book is still dead on. There's a tiny little thing here or there I would probably change in another edition, but they're so minuscule, most people wouldn't catch those anyway. So, but what we have in chiropractic is absolutely an incredible opportunity, because this whole field that's really growing massively. There are thousands of studies that have been done, looking at metrics of ways of measuring adaptability in all kinds of fields, but very few in chiropractic. Well, there's very few studies in chiropractic in that sense, because the public funding of research, which is what most research is, or private funding through large, universities, institutions, they are not looking at chiropractic because they don't understand it. And quite honestly, part of that is our fault, because we're the ones with the message. And if we decide not to share that, well, we've got our own problems. But I apologize for coming to you from what looks like the long room at the university in Dublin. I'm actually not there.
All right. Yeah, I was thinking about it. Yeah.
So this morning I looked and all my backgrounds were gone, so I didn't know what to do. So I found this in my files and put it up quick. So
well, it's a beautiful one.
It is a gorgeous place, and there's such wisdom in books. I tell children in my office all the time, everything you're ever going to need to know is in a book, because I encourage them to read and to explore and think new things. We're in a time where too many people are getting their education from social media, and it's tough because we're guided down a path. And once we accept a few facts in this direction, we refuse to look at a different viewpoint. And that's unfortunate. And books allow us that opportunity to shift dramatically between views. And but anyway, I want to, should I go ahead and start this?
Yes, please do.
Let me figure out how to do this. Yeah. I think this is it.
So while you're doing that, I just say that for those that are listening on this as a pod, I will be putting a link underneath here, so you can actually watch it as well on the YouTube. So if you want to get access to all the slides, if you're more of a visual as well. So it will be on both YouTube and on the pod.
Great, great. Well, information is information. I'm glad to get it out there any way that's possible. And most of this research that we're going to talk about has been done by psychophysiologists. They're people who study the physical side of psychology, what's going on in the body that is underlying anxiety or underlying schizophrenia or underlying, so many different depression and so many different things. And they're using physiology to get a window into how what's beneath that makes up that psychological makeup of what we are. And they're really leading the way in major universities around the world. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put my glasses on. I'm sorry they reflect blue back at you, but I want to go ahead and get started. So my email address is down in the corner, chirobooks@sbcglobal.net. Always feel free to contact me with any questions or anything. I'm glad to do my best to answer them. I don't always have an answer, but I will definitely give that a try. Let me see if I can. How do I advance? Oh, there we go. Okay. So I always like to start with Didi. In his 1910 text, that 1,007-page monster book he wrote, he has this little story in there. And he said, one question was always uppermost in my mind in my search for the cause of disease. I desired to know why one person was ailing and his associate, eating at the same table, working in the same shop, at the same bench, was not. Why? What difference was there in two persons that caused one to have pneumonia, catarrh, typhoid, or rheumatism, while his partner, similarly situated, escaped? Why? And what's important to notice about this is what he's asking isn't why is this person sick? He desired to know why his associate, eating at the same table, working at the same shop, the same bench, was not. Why? Why did this partner escape the fate of his associate that he worked with? And that's what he's interested in. It's the why of health, not the why of disease. And that's really where we take a separation at the very beginning from the path that medicine takes and the path that chiropractic takes. Now, we had briefly, before we started, mentioned pre-nosological diagnosis, and this really came from Russia. There was a researcher there who may still be doing research. I'm not sure. I haven't checked up on him in the last 5 or 6 years, but Roman Bayevsky. And Roman Bayevsky has been involved in heart rate variability research since the very beginning. And, going back to 1965-ish, in that era, the Russian space program was trying to figure out what can we do to determine which astronauts might have an ailment while they're in space. You don't want to have someone need an appendectomy while they're in space. What can we do to help, ferret out this dig up this information? And what they developed, what they're really looking for, nosology is the science of the studying of where something comes from, what's behind something, what starts it. So pre-nosology really has to deal with, before there's a symptom, before there's a sign, before the doctor or the patient knows there's a problem. How can we find out who has the potentiality to have lost health? And depending which of these studies you read, in any community, 70 to 90% of the people in that community have undiagnosable states of lost health. So they've already stepped away from optimal health, but they don't have symptoms yet. They don't have signs. When people show up in their later decades of life with organ failure, or they're unable to get off oxygen again, or so many different states, they have diabetic issues and all of these things. They don't start the day the symptoms start. They start what they find years earlier, decades earlier. And science has looked into this and tried to understand a little bit better how this works. And, the conclusion in this particular study that I referenced in the corner here stated these persons need assessment of the level of health rather than the diagnosis of disease. And these are those two people Didi was talking about. So they're saying, have they lost health? They don't have a symptom yet, but are they heading that way? Is the potentiality going in the wrong direction? And what they developed was heart rate variability. We'll get into that in a minute. it's not the only way, but in the, that sprung out of that space program in the 1960s, and others use it. The Italian space program uses it. The Navy SEALs here in the United States, the elite Navy team, they use it in their training. And, now sports teams use it, and almost everybody has a watch that is looking at it all the time. And there you go. So, it's a curiosity for all of us. There's a little cloudiness on what a lot of these things mean, and we'll get to that in just a minute. So what we're looking at is complexity, and we'll talk a little bit about what that means, because living things are complex. They're able to adapt, and if you can adapt, if I put a flower in my windowsill here, and here in the library, if I put a flower in the windowsill, and I like to look at the sunflower, so I turn it to face me because I like to look at it. And I come back from lunch, well, somebody must have turned my plant the other way, so I turn it back to face me again. And before I leave again, it's facing out the window, because that plant can adapt. And the healthiest thing for that plant to do is to face the sun and absorb what it needs to maintain its health. Yeah. Now, what we're talking about here is a living thing. The time I turn that plant to face me and it doesn't turn back, that means it's dead. Yeah. So the idea that when we stop adapting, that's the end of us. That's the end of our life. We adapt through our entire existence. So anyway, this is from Dr. Hong at Ohio University. In conclusion, diseases are not lurking in the shadows, waiting to pounce on unsuspecting victims, but rather represent a perturbation of coordinated dynamics of many different physiological systems. So what he's saying is there's something upsetting what's behind the coordination. There's a lack of communication that's setting up the physiology of the body to have this potentiality for failure, decades later. So in chiropractic, we talk about the mental impulse, and now, there's elements in the profession that kind of go, but the reality is that it's not interchangeable with nerve impulse. A nerve impulse, we know there have been papers written by physiologists, psychologists, even physiological engineers that talk about how, given the fact that there's a half a millisecond delay at a synapse, with the fact that some brain cells have 20,000 connections that one cell, might make. Yeah. You do the math on this at a half a millisecond, a synapse, the brain doesn't possibly work. It doesn't work. We know it doesn't. Look, here's the math. It doesn't work. Well, we know the brain does work. So we know there's something more than what we understand right now. So when they defined the nerve impulse back in the early 1900s, the definition that they were using was mostly about, membrane polarization, depolarization along the cell, the body of the cell, or the axons in through the cell. And, they also talk about vesicle formation at the terminal bulb that releases chemicals across the synapse. And you factor in all of these ways of communication between two nerves, and it still can't explain the speed and efficiency of the brain. So there's more to a nerve impulse than is defined by with the term nerve impulse. So back in that era, 100 years ago, they said, we're going to use the term mental impulse because we're saying there's something more to it than we understand right now. And if science says, well, this nerve impulse is wrong, we're going to call it something else later. If we would have married our profession to something that needs to be, that has been abandoned and moved away from, well, now we'd have to change it. You know what I'm trying to say? So what they wanted is just this is a placeholder until science really gets up to speed with, answering those questions that we can't answer yet. I mean, they're trying, believe me, they're every so often you see a really good article talking about a new method of communication between cells and the brain. And it's enlightening, but, we're still not there. So it's our placeholder. And, the purpose of a mental impulse is to adapt a tissue cell for this moment in time. So when the body sends a message of what this cell specifically needs to do for its function, which is always for the betterment of all the cells in the body, for the entire body together, is to adapt that tissue cell to work in that community of cells of our body. So if we have a way of measuring what this mental impulse does, which is adaptability, then we have a way of looking at it. And people will say, well, you can't directly measure a mental impulse. But, the problem is, let me see if I have it here. We'll get to that in a second. Okay, so when coordination in our body starts to fail, there's two different potentialities. There's optimal function at one end. And when we start to slide away from optimal function, we may not have symptoms. We may not have signs. We may have nothing that any doctor could understand that there's a problem. They may look at us and go, you're perfectly fine. But that's not the case. There are ways of looking at it today that are a little newer and better, and we'll get into those. But once you shift off that optimal function, there's two different things that can happen. Either you're going to go through a process of restoration where that's going to, that whatever is interfering with that healthy function in the body is going to be removed, and the optimal function can be achieved again, or we're going to slide the other direction, which isn't very promising. So when we talk about what we do as chiropractors with the vertebral subluxation, that misalignment in the spine that interferes with that communication system, can it be researched? And we hear a lot in our profession arguments about whether this is right or not. And it's funny because I explain these things to researchers that, to my knowledge, no one in our profession has had conversations with these people because they're such huge research minds. And I'll show you some of them in a little bit. But I explained to them, I asked them, is this something that can be researched? And they said, well, explain to me the parameters of what this means. And I go through what the subluxation is, and of course it can. And it's only our own people in our profession that sometimes just automatically throw up this, oh, it can't be researched. And these are researchers that if they write a paper, 1,000 other papers will reference their paper. And, most researchers are lucky if they'll get 2 or 3 people to reference a paper. So, these are big minds that have no problem with understanding this, but they don't come into it with a preconceived idea. Yeah. They're willing to understand it better. And from my philosophical side, I can explain a subluxation and the parameters of it as well as anyone. How do we take blood pressure? In a medical study, if they're going to do a study of blood pressure, do they open up an artery and stick a Doppler in there and measure directly the pressure? Of course not. That's not what they do at all. They measure the effect of blood pressure, which is distension of the arm. That's not blood pressure. You're measuring the distension of the arm and the pressure that distension puts on the cuff. So that's, of course, you notice I use the Swedish spelling for you of the sphygmometer, that cuff that they put around and pump up, So what are they really measuring? It's the effect of the blood pressure. So when we're measuring the effect of the mental impulse, which is adaptation, and we see a diminished adaptation in post-adjustment, we see that level of adaptation increase. We can deduce just as easily and as scientifically as they do with blood pressure with the distension of the surface of the skin. So the same concept. So if to argue the mental impulse research side is the same thing as saying, I don't believe using a blood pressure cuff does any good at all. And until our schools are willing to toss all the blood pressure cuffs out and stick Doppler devices into the arteries or right into the aorta for us to measure, I don't believe that they really think that's true. So, we look at how that adaptability changes things. This is my grandson, who's now 13. He's a little bigger than that now, but I like to stick him in every presentation because he makes me happy.
Wonderful.
Dede said he had 4 postulates in his text. And his first one was disease is not a thing of enmity. Or his second one, actually. The first one was disease is not an entity. Disease isn't a thing. Yeah. Health is a thing. Disease is an absence of something. It's kind of like light and dark. You go into a dark room and you turn on the light. Where did the darkness go? Well, it didn't go anywhere because darkness isn't a thing. It's an absence of something. And health works in that same capacity. As researchers are finding. And this is from Joachim Sternberg, who's a brilliant leading researcher of a movement that's trying to change medicine's focus from disease to looking at the loss of health instead of fighting disease. Not to say that they shouldn't do that as well, but he's trying to get them to understand that loss of health, when they first start to shift away from that, that's where medicine should be focusing. They can argue about that. That's their thing. But there are researchers around the country and medical education people. at Georgetown University, which is a very large medical school here in the United States by Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
There are major medical schools here in our country and in Europe and around the world that are involved in this. And, he makes the statement that complex adaptive systems, which are what living things are, they're complex and they adapt. So that's, are defined by their core focus. Changing the health system requires a change of the core focus from disease to health. So he's saying health is the entity, yeah, which is the same thing that Dede was saying in 1910. And it's kind of amusing to me because I have an email from him from, I was probably 2014 or so, and had asked him a few questions, and he wrote back and said he had coined a new term to discuss that early departure from health where there's no symptoms yet and there's no anything. And he said, I call it dis-ease. What do you think of that? And I wrote him back and I said, I'd go with it. I don't want to get into it. But it's funny how, yeah, they're seeing that the word diseases that doesn't fit properly. So it's not exactly the same meaning we use our term for, but it's close enough. So what difference is there? There's the two viewpoints, fighting sickness. Well, it's diagnosable because you have to have a symptom to enter the system, or you have to have a sign. So if you get your blood work done and they tell you, your cholesterol's high, we need to get you on this medication, which will lower your cholesterol. But why is it high? No, we just need to get you on this medication that's going to lower your cholesterol. So we don't really get to the root. It's diagnosable. So you have to have a symptom to have a diagnosis, because we're not talking about that pre-nosological idea, that they're not into that. From the other perspective, losing health, if health is the entity, you can be symptom-free and still enter that system. You can use a flow chart. So if there's something wrong with my computer, which this morning it updated, and I was a few minutes late, I apologize. I can't decide when this thing decides to do something crazy, but so if I change the size of the RAM chip, the random access memory chip in my computer from say it's an 8 gigabyte, and I change it to a 16 gigabyte, well, there I'm sure is a mathematical formula to determine the speed of things that will change in my computer. I'm sure there's a way that they're fairly accurate. So, and if something doesn't work in my computer, I can go through a flow chart of what the problem, or my car, it doesn't matter. I can go through a flow chart to say, well, is it doing this? Yes or no? Okay. And then in this way, and you keep going down and you answer all these little questions, these little boxes, until it says, the problem is, something with your, fuel injection system or something in your car, whatever. So at least brings it down to a diagnosis. That doesn't work in healthcare. It may sometimes, but it's riddled with error. Medicine, there's a new article last week I just put in a philosophy page to have some discussion about, which is talking about how they can't repeat studies, because you take a group of people and you even if they've even done it with identical twins, where they put one set of identical twins is the control group, one set is the test group. And what they find is that even in those studies, when they're not repeatable. So they use a different set of identical twins and they get different results, because each person is different. They're not identical twins aren't identical. They have enough differences between their function that make the study of them difficult, because they adapt at different rates. So in that model of fighting sickness, they're complicated. I mean, like the computer, I may not understand astrophysics, and I may not understand planetary motion, and when they say, this is going to be lined up with this, I don't know what they're talking about. But Martin, you may understand this well enough to explain it to me, and I'll understand it. It's complicated, but I can understand it, and it'll make sense, and it's very predictable. The ancient Mayans in Mexico, they knew when there was going to be an eclipse. Because it's very predictable. It's complicated, but it is predictable. It's linear. So what linear means is if I put that RAM chip in my computer to increase its function, or change something in this computer to change its function, it's very linear. So I know if I do this, this will be the result. But if I give, if I give a person or something that can adapt an aspirin for their headache, is their headache going to go away? Well, it may not. We don't really know. It's unpredictable, because the change in every person, because we adapt living things adapt, and we're complex. The difference between complex and complicated is that whole idea of how we adapt. And today, that's where a lot of medical education is driving towards, to look at this nonlinear aspect, because, you know, A plus B doesn't always equal C in living things. If it was, then, you know, we wouldn't have people that, you know, had an allergic reaction and died, or whatever it might be. Or we would say this person's going to have COVID and they'll live. This person's going to have COVID and they'll die. They don't know those things because we all function differently. So, as I mentioned, it's filled with anomalies in fighting sickness, because what may make a difference for one person may not make a difference for another person. And the idea of losing health, the science is very supportive of the whole concept of this. Now, I'm not saying that we should get rid of fighting sickness as an idea completely, because I think that medicine, as far as part of their goal, if I am, you know, if I have an arrow in the side of my head, I would like medicine to take care of that for me. And that's a problem. You know, if I have a football-sized tumor or something, I don't want them just to focus on my health. You know what I mean? Or if I'm bleeding, if I cut myself and I'm bleeding, I don't want them to focus just on my fact that, oh, he's losing health. I want them to take care of that problem, and then we'll worry about, you see what I mean? Yeah. So from medicine's perspective, they're not trying to get rid of one over the other. What they're trying to do is get more understanding of what's on the right side of this chart, which is a new idea for them. But it's as old as our profession is for us. It's the way we think. So, I kind of talked about that. So if you know all the pieces, I can define what a computer is. You know, we don't do that. You know, if you put a medication into a person, you may or may not get the exact result you expect. And chances are there are going to be things with it. If you give someone a cholesterol medication, well, now they may have back pain, because cholesterol medications are known to cause a lot of aches and pains in the body. Yeah. So, you know, those are unpredictable things that may or may not happen. And you give an adjustment to someone, a chiropractic adjustment, you may see the change that they expect, or you may not see the change that they expect. They may see something far different. There may be something change that neither of you expected, which I'm sure we've both seen these things in practice. You know, and that's kind of the fun and the unfortunateness of dealing with living things, is you can't always know for sure what the outcome is going to be. So, and you can't take a kidney specialist and a lung specialist and a heart specialist and put them all in a room and explain how the body works. It doesn't work that way, because there's an overriding everything that none of them are really paying attention to, and that's that complexity, the idea of what's behind the ability to adapt. And that's why parts-focused medicine, you know, I'm a kidney specialist, or I'm a lung specialist. It's a subspecialty in medicine to be parts-focused, but they're never going to understand the full picture at the same time. And I'm not saying we should get rid of cardiologists and get rid of lung people. I'm not saying that. That's not the point. But it's just a different way of looking at the same idea. Yeah. You know, what's gonna be the outcome of you giving an adjustment to the next fortunate person that comes through your door today? You don't know that, and I don't know that for sure. But you know, the downsides of chiropractic are typically far less than other options people have out there as well. So yeah, it's, you know, we kind of hit those things already. Now, this is Dr. Catterndall, who's a researcher at a medical school in San Antonio, Texas. And, you know, he made the comment that nonlinearity may explain poor treatment response of traditional approaches, limiting the benefits of cookbook practice guidelines. Yeah. So when we see practice guidelines, even in our profession, a lot of us just shake our heads and go, we're missing the point. We're looking at this as if it's a linear dead thing. You know, those ideas may work great for corpses, but they don't work for living things. They just don't. There's too many things that fall outside of that theory. And when you start having anomalies, things that fall outside of your ability to answer them, you need to look at your theory again and say, maybe there's another way of looking at this. But in chiropractic, we have that. So, you know, talking about evidence-based medicine, you know, back to Dr. Sternberg, who I mentioned before, most published medical research is wrong, and critics coined the term, the acronym GAGO, garbage in, garbage out, as a meme to highlight the risks of blind faith and the hyped up procedures of the evidence-based movement. He's not some radical medical professor at a school in New South Wales. He is a well-respected person in the field of medicine. He's not some guy screaming on the sidewalk, standing on a box with a bullhorn. I mean, he's a legitimate researcher. And there's a lot of these people that look at the whole idea of what the evidence-based movement has turned into, which is, you have to have a double-blind study and these things. That's not what evidence-based was ever intended to mean. It's what some people have decided it means, and it's unfortunate. Back to Dr. Catterdahl, interventions targeting dynamics would have applications here because we're dynamic, we're changing. So things that look at that would have an ability to help in this situation. Treatment would focus on changing the dynamic pattern, so changing that pattern from periodicity to complexity, and we'll get to that in a minute, rather than looking at the symptoms. Because one actually is a precursor of the other. One is a leading indicator. So I can go past where I buy fuel for my car at the gas station here. I can drive by and go, oh, the gas prices went up. But that's not. But if I watched the news, let's say, and they said, oh, there was an oil fire in the Middle East today or whatever. Well, that means the gas station is going to go up this week because that's how they do it. They look for anything, that somebody sneezed in wherever and they're going to raise the gas price. So that's a leading indicator. When I know that the oil fields are burning in the Middle East, I need to go down right now and fill my car up because I know that price is going to go up. So to look at that symptom of the price isn't going to give you that ability to get ahead of something, that seeing the problem of that oil field as you can tell what's coming. It's a leading indicator. And, to wait for a lagging indicator like a symptom is it's not great policy. So when he talks about focus on change the dynamic pattern, here's an example of, skin temperature that's been used in our profession since 1904. Sorry. And the red is the pre and the blue is the post. It's a little hard to see that little blue line hidden over here, but these are 7 minutes apart on a patient who was adjusted, just to give an idea. Yeah. So what we're looking for, BJ looked for a pattern. So in this red one, we see this swing this way back here. So when we're looking for that pattern, we can do this. I've had patients come back I haven't seen in 5 or 6 years, and I do another temperature scan, and it lays right over their pattern when they had problems before. And so it's very repeatable in that sense. So when you change that dynamic pattern that Dr. Catterdahl was talking about, it's exactly the purpose of what Dr. Palmer was doing with skin temperature. I'm just using that as an example. Yeah. There's the head of the Virginia Tech Mind-Body Lab, which is a major medical facility here in the United States. He used temperature control to explain the whole idea of the dynamic patterns in the body as well. And he doesn't even understand the way we use it, but it's a very fitting way of looking at it. But what we need to look at, because it's nonlinear, there's not, I don't want to say randomness, because there's always a cause and effect. But, when I was a kid, this is a very small picture, a small one in this picture. But when I was a child, we had these things in our parks, and they were probably 10 to 15 feet across. They were gigantic. Yeah. And some poor unsuspecting child, which was probably typically me, you'd get him in the center of it, and 4 or 5 other people would start spinning this thing like crazy. And as long as you stayed in the middle, you could adapt pretty well. But as soon as you got to the outside of that center, centrifugal force would take you back, and you're holding on. And this little girl in this picture, it's the same idea of what innate intelligence does in the body. It resists entropy, that idea of breaking something down to its simplest parts is to resist entropy. So the wisdom of our bodies, that what's happening when we're alive, the whole idea of life is to resist entropy in that opposite direction. So the forces of those universal forces of this little boy in this picture are putting a strain upon, a stress upon the body resist that entropy, that universal force. So I just like this because it reminds me of my childhood.
Yeah.
I'm sure I took a few too many spills off of these things probably, but it's the same idea. What they find in research is that to have increased levels of health, you have to have decreased levels of entropy. So the better your body resists entropy, the healthier you are. And as our health begins to fail, our ability to resist entropy decreases. So, you see pathology, you have higher entropy levels. And they also find that to have higher information through the transmission through the body, like we talked about the mental impulse in that sense, to have communication in the body, the better the communication level is, the lower the entropy is, the lower we're being broken down. And, all of us can take the skin on the back of our hand here and just kind of lift that up and let it go. And, a few years ago, that would snap back to this beautifully smooth baby skin that I had. And, now I'm pushing 60 and I don't quite have that anymore. And I suppose in a few years, I'll have to, work it back down to look flat again. But that's just how our bodies work. The forces of entropy work on us throughout our life. It's part of the aging process. In this little illustration in the corner, you see someone tossing bricks. Well, it's not too probable that the bricks are going to fall in this beautiful pile. They're going to fall more likely in this pile of randomness, because it takes an intellectual process of really being very good. You see someone who's a construction worker that does something that make it look so easy on television. And then when we try it in our own houses, it's not so easy, because they have developed a skill. So this takes a level of skill, a level of intellectual function to get this to happen, to fall in a more orderly, a less disorderly fashion, which is entropy. So it's just another illustration of that same concept. Now, this is a researcher in South America who, I don't even know if he knows what chiropractic is. He wasn't talking about chiropractic, but he was talking about how the body resists entropy. And he said, biological intelligence is the entity responsible for regulating neuroendocrine, biochemical, immune, and cellular responses. An organization relates to organ function and structure. So he's saying that there's an intelligence, it's an intellectual process to resist entropy. Well, that's kind of an interesting thing for someone outside of our field to understand. And I was kind of impressed by that. By definition, only an intelligent system can process information and energy to reduce entropy. So to adapt those universal forces to reduce entropy, it takes an intellect, it takes an intelligence. There has an intelligent system has to do this. A living plant can do this. A dead plant can't. The innate intelligence of that plant, that's the inborn wisdom that's going on in that plant that keeps it facing the sun, so it can best resist that breaking down. So it adapts those universal forces from the sun, which can be damaging, that actually it transmits those and helps use those for healthy processes in the plant. So we're not talking about some spiritual thing at all. I mean, it's a plant, for crying out loud. It's just the idea that it's an intellectual process. They're saying living things, there's an intelligence in living things. This unequivocal fact, as he continues, then demonstrates the existence of a regulating biological intelligence within the human body. Intelligence is the way in which life affronts entropy. I love that sentence, because he's saying as long as there's an intelligence within the body that's working to resist entropy, we can continue. In the moment of our death, that's no longer happening. In consequence, if a reduction of illness is to be achieved, entropy must be reduced. A comprehensive way of accomplishing this is restoring negative entropy or order. So restoring order, within that intellectual system, something is causing disorder. Now, from our perspective as chiropractors, we look for a specific entity, a specific thing that can affect that. And that's, of course, a subluxation in the spine. It's affecting the communication through the spine. Because as Dr. Palmer used to say, every organ in your body is connected to the one under your hat. So every communication of intellectual response to the environment has to go through the spine. So I kind of summarize what they're saying here is communication from intelligence results in resisting entropy. The level of entropy resistant is commensurate or equivalent to how you're adapting, and it's therefore proportional to health. So the entropy resistance, and you can go on, are you familiar with Google Scholar? You can go on Google Scholar and in quotes type entropy resistance and put it in quotes, and you'll find studies on this subject where they're looking at this. This isn't some strange chiropractic concept. There are no strange chiropractic concepts. Nothing that's been thought hasn't been thought before, but putting it together the way we do in our profession to give us an opportunity to look for a specific type of interference to that ability to resist entropy. That's what we're about. Does an adjustment improve health? So really, we have to know if it improves the complexity of the body. And there have been ways of looking at this mathematically through algorithms for a number of years. The problem with them, they all had limitations. Some of them needed hours and hours of data. So you can look at blood pressure variability. So if you ever visited someone in the hospital, they have the machine with you can look at the oxygen level and it'll go up and down just a little bit, a point or two, or the blood pressure, every time it gets taken, it may not be the same as it was, So the heart rate will go up and down. That's adapting. When you visit someone in a hospital and you see static where it doesn't change, that's not a good sign for things. I'm not predicting their death, of course, but that ability to adapt, that's what's going on. They're healthy enough to still adapt, and that's important. So I sought out, I presented something in 2018 at the Adaptability Research Symposium in Chicago about a patient. I gave some examples of pre and post using electrocardiograms hooked to the body and running that through some algorithms. I was showing how the complexity improved, and a speaker from Ohio State University, who's an absolute leader in this since the early 70s, a brilliant, brilliant man. We were sitting at dinner and he said, those algorithms don't do everything you think they do. And I said, what explain that? And he said, they're not perfect. They're not there yet. And that put me on a path. So for the next several years, I looked at every paper I could find that had a new algorithm. And I looked at their data and looked at the reliability. And the ones I ended up with, there's three of them. And these are the formulas for them. The first one is distribution entropy. The middle one is modified distribution entropy, and the bottom one is phase entropy. And I actually hired, because I needed to have someone who understood this and understood the technological side of building a website. I found a mathematical physicist in Denmark who I hired at a university to do this for me. And he put together this website that calculates these things for researchers for free. So people can upload their data, they get their answers, and they go do their thing. I don't know who's even using it. It doesn't matter. To me, I wanted to make sure that if these are doing these calculations are doing what they're supposed to, we should have really good probability levels. Now, what that means is in research, kind of a standard is a p-value or a probability value less than 0.05. So what that means is that there's a 95% probability that this data that I'm presenting in my study is proper, that the conclusions drawn are proper, that type of thing. So these have p-values that are in the neighborhood of 0.00 something, which is 10 times more than they need to do, times 10 to the negative 14th. I mean, we're talking so many. These are incredibly good algorithms. So I was quite excited by these, and I put this together so that we could actually get more great information. So we'll take a look at what this means. So really what this means is that, that nonlinear, that lack of predictability, but what we really need to know is the physiology in my body coordinated better? So if you give me an adjustment and we measured before and after that adjustment, and I ran it through these algorithms, we would have an understanding of how that change of information function in the body, or that adjustment you gave, how does that affect my body's ability to function complexity, which means that resisting entropy? That's what these are about. So this was pretty exciting stuff for me, because I was able to take those same cases I used in my presentation and run them through these algorithms. And I was pleasantly surprised that these algorithms also showed that the body, the subjects that you adjust with a specific chiropractic adjustment, it was a drastic change in the coordination of their body. And the neat thing about these, when you use heart rate variability, you're looking at the flow of information through the vagus nerves here to the heart. That's it. I can't tell you anything about how the immune system is functioning better, or how the neuro, respiratory system, or the whatever. I can't tell you those things because they're separate from heart rate variability, because that only measures the information from here to the heart. That's it. But when you run that same mathematical spreadsheet, that list of numbers, if you run that through these algorithms, what they actually tell you isn't about that cardiovagal idea. What they tell you is how the physiology, the complexity of the entire person. So this gives us a massive amount of information. So what it's saying is that if you adjust someone and see changes in these calculations, what the researchers have shown is that this is about the physiological control of the entire body. So that includes everything: neurorespiratory, neuroimmune, pick a system. It doesn't really matter. It's everything in the body is the complexity of it has improved, which means that the entire body now resists entropy better than it did before you gave that adjustment. So it's an interesting way of looking at this.
Yeah, for sure. Amazing.
Yes, and you always want these to look better. Heart rate variability may go up, it may go down post-adjustment, because increasing heart rate variability isn't our goal. Our goal is to change, to see that change, because when we see a change in the system, that's really what we're looking for. And we'll explain that in a minute.
Yeah. Okay.
Here's the picture of the website. It's entropycalc.com. Again, it's completely free for anyone to use. That has data to put up. There's a description link down here where it says first click the description link, and that's this page. And it really explains this, why these make sense in a pretty brief, simple way. So that's where I would go if you wanted to understand these three time series algorithms a little better. But let's look at heart rate variability, because I'm going to keep you here all day if I don't move a little faster. So heart rate variability, what that means is, I don't know, can you see my arrow here?
Yeah.
Okay. So from this point to this point, we measure it in time. So this is 2.5 seconds of heartbeat data here at the bottom. And now the space between this peak and this peak, the center of each peak, is 859 milliseconds, which is, 0.859 seconds. So between this beat and the next one, what changes now, it's a little closer, and the third one is even closer. So this one, if this stays exactly the same in all 76, and this one's at 83. So because the body's adapting, that heart rate variability, it should vary. It should go up and down. Those spacing should do like this back and forth. And what we don't want to see is if you have a heart rate of 60, most cardiologists would say, good for you, that's fantastic. But the problem is,
you froze up.
River twice.
We had a glitch. The internet went down for a second or two there.
Oh, okay. That's okay.
We're back again.
Okay. Well, I was edited. No, I'm just kidding. So if you're 60 beats a minute and they're exactly a second apart, that's pathological. We want to see that the body is able to adapt and change, because, like I said, there's an old expression: you can't step in the same river twice, because the river's moving, it's changing all the time. And it's the same idea with our physiology. Decreased, now this is from a chiropractic study. What about the adjustment? This was done with 520 subjects. Decreased heart rate and increased total power from heart rate variability analysis indicated a healthy autonomic nervous system balance after correctional vertebral subluxation. So this was done back and put out back in 2004. Our technology is better than it was then, so we can get better information than they were able to get at that time today. And that's not a fault; it's just where things were. But the point being that it was a dramatic change in that variability, that function that we were just talking about post adjustment. So this isn't something that hasn't been looked at, but we look at where we can go in the future. This is pupillary light reflex. So what that is, it's a tool that you put over the eye. It's a handheld thing you put over the eye, and there's a light ring that lights up real quick. It flashes, and so when it flashes, you see the pupil. The size of the pupil will get smaller because of the flat. You put a light in your eyes, your pupils get smaller because that you want to restrict the amount of light so you can still see. So that happens, it comes down and then it comes back up slowly over time. So this is the constricting the pupil is a parasympathetic supply. Yeah. Coming back the other way is largely sympathetic. It's hard to get sympathetic information from this, but we can at least get some parasympathetic information that's pretty accurate. This is a pre and a post. This is a young lady that was kicked in the head playing soccer, the football. She was kicked in the head, and I think she was about 10 or 11 at the time. And these are taken, you can see the time here, 13:23, and this one's at 13:30. So it's just under 7 minutes apart. This is very bad. This is not the way it's supposed to look. It should look kind of like a pipe. If you're holding a pipe, it should go down very quickly and then kind of go back over time this way. And if it went longer, it would drift all the way back this way. So that's what we like to see, a very quick drop here. And if you follow this straight line down, it would hit somewhere before 1 second. Now, if we follow this one down, you see it's hitting way back here. So that the constriction velocity, the speed that it closes, was at 2.36 millimeters per second here. And post, we're looking at 3.16. The mean constriction velocity was 3.01, and post adjustment was 5.14. This is very unhealthy. This is a sign that we see in people with concussions and that type of thing. And this is 7 minutes later after an adjustment. The nerve side of the issue has completely resolved from that perspective. So we can see that dramatic change, and this is pretty common. So anyway, just to give you a hint, and there's what I'm talking about. You see that pipe shape here. This is parasympathetic. This is a mixture of both. This is mostly sympathetic, but it's hard to really get information out of that. But this is really shown to be with reliability equivalent to some measures of heart rate variability. And this takes 2 seconds. It's much faster. Now, the instrument in American money is about $6,000, which I would never tell anybody to buy one of these. They're ridiculously expensive. The company, they're great instruments, but the company is horrible. They're terrible people that will not support anything. So I'm not a fan. But they're coming out with things that work in a smartphone, so that oh, you can't see my phone. That's really weird. There it is. You could, with this tool. So theoretically, someone at your front desk, when someone comes in to see you, they could hold that up and do this on the way in, and they can do it on the way out again, and look at the difference between the two. So I'm not saying people need to do this, but it's a way that we can get information for research purposes. Yeah. It's not going to tell me who needs adjusted and who doesn't need an adjustment, but these are the things I can look at before and after just to see what's going on in the body to get a bigger picture of this. This is from last December. It's another one. What we're looking at here is the mean constriction velocity. Yeah. It was at 548, 525, and then right and left. And here's post adjustment 593, 609. So this is definitely a pretty dramatic change, and you can see how the right and left, they're not doing the same thing here. they're kind of separated. And you can see in the post adjustment how they laid right on top of each other here, that like that parasympathetic part of this measure laid right on top. So that means that the function between both eyes equalized, you know, where one was doing something much different. Yeah. The difference between the right and the left eye in the you know, here, like the minimum, where it stopped constricting in one eye was 2.75 millimeters. The other one was 3.23. So that's 0.48. That's a big difference. Post adjustment, you know, it's a very tiny, it's a 1/10 of a millimeter difference. Yeah. So, I mean, that's a dramatic change as well. So it's kind of a fun little thing, but, you know, it gives us some information. Now, this is a pre and post adjustment heart rate variability metric called respiratory sinus arrhythmia. It's a very accurate way of looking at heart rate variability. It's considered the gold standard. High frequency is considered the gold standard today of looking at parasympathetic function, more so than the pupillary light or anything. This is definitely as good as it gets. So we see that before the adjustment here at baseline, it's hovering right around 4, and post adjustment, it's about 4.8, 4.9, somewhere up in that area. And I would look at that in my practice and think, well, it's not that huge of a change, but it's a change. Now, this was done live at our last research symposium in 2018. And sitting next to me in the back of the room when the engineers from Ohio State did this study themselves, this wasn't done by us. They did this of a pre and post adjustment. And this esteemed researcher leaned over to me and he said, "What is that scale on the left?" It was, we were in the back of the room, and I told him, and he said, "That is a massive change." And I thought, buddy, you don't know what a massive change is. I've seen something, 2-3 times this big of a change, but it was impressive to me that it was impressive to someone who's been doing this for 50 years, that they see this whole idea, and, they're willing to come and talk to our groups because they understand the metrics we're talking about in these things. Now, this is a hypnogram. I didn't do this. This is from a study. So this looks at the depth of sleep stages here. So in a child that doesn't bedwet, this is kind of what we see. They get into that deep sleep. They come back a little bit. They get into a deep sleep, come back. It does this all through the night. Now, this is a child that's a bedwetter and anuresis. So here they get into this deep stage and they stay there, and they stay there for so long, which is a heavy parasympathetic thing, that at some point they bedwet because it has an effect on there's 2 sphincters. One you control when you're awake, and one you can only control when you're one's 24 hours a day, and the other one only when you're awake. So when you go to sleep, obviously the one is gone, out of commission. So the other one has to do all the work. And what this means is that when they stay in that depth of sleep where it's heavy parasympathetic impulse supply, that it can cause that other sphincter to weaken. And all you need is a few drops of urine to get through the ureter, and it causes a compression of the detrusor muscle around the bladder, which is parasympathetic. It causes that strong contraction, and they bedwet. So it's not the child's fault. It's not that they're drinking too late at night, because a lot of kids drink a glass of water before they go to bed and they don't have a problem. So that's not it. This is what we're finding in these children. So what about chiropractic? So what we find in these kids is they're heavily parasympathetic. What that means is their variability is going to be really high. Yeah. So in these studies, these kids have very high variability, and children the same age that don't bedwet, their variability is there, but it's not as wild as those kids. So to me, if I give an adjustment to one of these children and it affects their bedwetting, it should also decrease their heart rate variability to that closer to what a child that doesn't bedwet. So it's kind of the opposite. And this is why I say it doesn't always need to go up. It needs to change. So what does this mean? So I tried this in the practice, and I did pupillary light reflex. And these are the changes I saw in that, bringing these a balance more to between the 2 eyes. And you can see that right eye had just under a 17% change. This one had a 4.14% change. Either way, these are dramatic changes in that world of research. Now, SDNN is the standard deviation from point to point. of all those measures. And it's a good metric. It's not a great one. It's a good one. A lot of researchers use it. And so their heart rate variability in that metric did go down. It's what I expect to see. This is not used too often, but that also went down. RMSSD, this is a pretty accurate one. Yeah. We're seeing about a 16% drop in heart rate variability. The number of beats that had 50 milliseconds or more variability between 2 beats consecutive beat went down almost 30%, which is that same idea. Low frequency, which isn't really in my book. There's a lot of studies that say it's about sympathetics, and it's really not. What they found is that it's a mixture of both. So it's not going to get sympathetics. You can't get sympathetic information from this either. But the idea is that you would still see this one increase because it's the opposite. The low frequency is opposite of the high frequency. This is the most accurate way of measuring heart rate variability, high frequency RSA. And that went down 35%. Now we're talking 7 minutes between a pre and a post adjustment. And this night, this child didn't bedwet for the first time. And I can't tell you how long. So I could tell you, but I don't remember. It was quite a while, and the change, that ratio of those two also changed pretty dramatically. So it's exactly what we expected to see from a scientific perspective, just based on what they know about bedwetters. It's what I expected. So this is kind of cool. But those bedwetters have more variability. But really, what it is, it depends what's behind it. Because generally, for most things, you see variability increase. Duodenal ulcers, they'll decrease. Eating disorders, those people have higher heart rate variability than people that don't have eating disorder. So there are things out there like that. So when you give an adjustment to someone and you don't see the change you expect, so what? Don't worry about it, because again, it's nonlinear. Stop with the expectations. What we need to do is say things are changing. That's what we're looking for. So behind the body, ideally, if I'm going to take a trip, I want the chauffeur to drive, not the monkey or chimpanzee, I should say. But if you look at the steering wheel, there's variability with that chauffeur. But there's much more variability with that chimpanzee. Yeah. That doesn't mean it's healthier. Does that make sense? The third way of looking at this is if like I said, if your heartbeats are all 1 second apart, they're exactly the same. It's like having one of these locks on your steering wheel, and that doesn't change at all. It's right there. That's not a healthy way to take a ride in a car. So if we kind of look, I'm going from where I live to, say, Ohio State to see a researcher. So if the chauffeur, he's going to pick the safest route in the middle, and he's going to get me there in the safest way, major highways, he'll avoid construction, because they're a chauffeur, they're a professional, they know what they're doing. The steering wheel with the club is going to go in a straight line. Well, that's not going to work, because I have to drive through, I'm going to ride through rivers and through homes and through people and through all kinds of things to get where I have to be. It's direct, but it's not going to get you there. It's not a healthy way to look at the physiology of the body. Now, the chimpanzee might accidentally get me to Ohio State, or at some point I might have to jump out of the car when I drive by. But, there's a lot of randomness. So what we really need to know is how complex is that function? And that's what those algorithms that I mentioned before do. This is Dr. Friedman, Bruce H. Friedman from Virginia Tech, the Mind Body Lab there. He runs that. He's a brilliant researcher. And he made this statement that, looking at physiological systems, health is marked by complex variability. Pathology is characterized by high predictability and rigid periodicity. That means that steering wheel has a lock on it. Yeah. It's very predictable. Where you're going to go is very predictable. The next heartbeat's probably going to be a second. The next heartbeat's probably going to be a second. It's very predictable, but that's not the way we should have. When you see predictability and it's very linear, there's problems. It's with the physiology. So health is always somewhere in the middle between that rigid, that steering wheel lock and that chimpanzee on the other side. So, somewhere in the middle, it's not a box. It's more of a thin line, but I couldn't write on a thin line, so I put it in a box, but same concept. Agesteros, he's a researcher at the Veterans Center in San Diego, among other things. He's very involved. And what they found is that autonomic imbalance is associated with decreased flexibility and remember they talked about the amount of, when we talk about the skin temperatures, what we're looking for is to break that pattern, that dynamic change. So we have a decreased dynamic flexibility, means it's getting static, increased vulnerability to pathologies, and consequently compromised health. So you may have a pathology develop, you're more vulnerable to it. You're more stress vulnerable instead of being stress resilient. So, you know, it's an important thing. Now, this young lady is responsible for one of those algorithms. She's a brilliant research mind. I'm not even going to try to attempt to say her name because I would just horribly butcher this poor genius's name here, but a brilliant researcher. And she's at Georgetown University, which I mentioned before, professor emeritus of medicine and medical ethics. So she said linear methods of measuring things are unable to capture the dynamics of nonlinear heart rate signals. So we need to understand the complexity, you know, and this is an example of the older algorithm I used to use, multi-scale entropy, which is still used today, but it's just not as good as these other ones. This is, again, a bedwetter. And what we want to see is these changes in complexity. Even though the heart rate variability went down, we want to see the complexity go up. And that's exactly what we found in all but 3 of the scale factors that are used. And some of the changes were as high as 744%. So those are big changes in 7 minutes. Yeah, we have such a cool thing in our profession. It's just absolutely amazing. This is the same picture, but it's in a chart instead, just to give a sense of what that's about. Now, I ran this data through these algorithms, and I found that the rate of complexity, the level of ability to resist entropy, or the complexity of physiological control in the body, increased. And this is a full body thing. This isn't about bedwetting. This is about how their whole body is functioning. We see these increases post-adjustment. So that's pretty cool. Wow. This is I'm going to think of which one this is. Okay. This is a case of cystic fibrosis. Is that something, cystic fibrosis? Does that translate?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, I don't know. I think
have different names in Swedish. Cystic fibrosis.
Okay. What's neat about these kids, when they come in, from the time they've been diagnosed, at however years old, a few years old, they're diagnosed with cystic fibrosis. And in our country, every 6 weeks, they get lung tests for the presence of bacteria. They check for 7 different bacteria, which these kids will eventually succumb to at some point in their life, very commonly. So every 6 weeks. So if you come in to see me, I have a stack of these things that I can show you, but I have to ask for them because they don't think to bring them. But what happens is these kids will have, one bacteria, 1 or 2, sometimes 2, but usually just 1 that's always there in every test. Staph aureus, for instance, it's always there every time, every 6 weeks. There it is, there it is, there it is, there it is. So what that basically means is before a chiropractic adjustment, I can sometimes go back 100 tests and say, always there, always there, always there, always there. So what that means is we now have 100 measures that say this is always there. Now, the way predictability works, the next test should be the same.
Yeah.
You don't expect it to suddenly change. And what we find universally with these kids in practice is that they get their first clean scan ever after their first adjustment.
Wow.
That's dramatic. And parents are very excited about this. I don't get rid of bacteria. I don't know what change needs to make. My job is to remove that interference so the communication flow in the body can happen the way it's supposed to, because we know through scientific research that a decrease in communication leads to the body not functioning optimally anymore. It starts to slide towards the sickness, if you want to use that term, starts to slide away from health, and it makes them more vulnerable. It's that vulnerability that's important, because you can go to that same Google Scholar and look up stress vulnerability in quotes. You'll find studies about stress vulnerability, stress resilience. You can put those in quotes and you'll find studies about those. And I suggest people do that because they're amazing. They're amazing that this. So when you look for a vertebral subluxation in a patient in your office, I don't say, let's see how your nerve system's doing today, because they feel fine. They're going to say, in their head, they're thinking, I'm fine. Well, let's see how your spine's doing. Well, they feel fine. So that's fine. But I say, let's see how you're adapting today. And when I determine that a subluxation is present, they always are saying, what did you find? What do you think? Because they don't understand what that means. And it's an opportunity for us to explain current science and how it interplays so well with our profession. So this is I just put the left eye up here for an illustration. So we saw almost a 10% increase in the speed that body is able to constrict that pupil. Now they've tied vagal function and parasympathetic function to immune function in many studies. That people who have an overriding sympathetic, that fight or flight, that their immune systems decrease. For instance, kids that are autistic, they have a more sympathetic, they're more towards fight or flight. So a lot of them, they get sick a lot. They have a lot of colds. They have a lot of different things that affect them. And so I see a lot of autistic kids because parents realize that, boy, my kid doesn't get sick like he used to anymore. And it's a big thing for people. Their children are very important, which I completely agree with. So we had, in excess of 50 tests going back every 6 weeks with this person here. And his next test showed clear 5 days later. His next test was 5 days. And I told his mother, I don't know what change you'll see. I mean, his next test is only a few days away. You may or may not see a change. I have no way of knowing that, but let's see what happens. And her appointment was the next day. And she called our office and left a message that night and said, I couldn't wait till tomorrow to tell you that he's had his first clear test, and we're so excited. And he has had, now this is 4 years later, he still has clear tests. So it's just the way the body functions, he still has his issues with cystic fibrosis. That doesn't go away. That's a genetic thing. I'm not treating cystic fibrosis. I'm not treating bacteria, and I'm not treating anything. My job is to remove an interference and stand back in awe of the body and what it's capable of doing. I always tell people before I give them their very first adjustment, if and when you feel better, you can't blame me. I'd love to take the credit, but that would make me cool. And I'm not cool. I'm just a guy. I'm doing my job. My job is to remove the interference. Your body is cool. Your body does the impressive thing. And after people see a change, I'll usually say something like, do you need another bottle of those tablets that Gail gave you at the front desk? Well, she didn't give me anything. They got ripped off. And I said, so I didn't put anything in you. I don't remember taking a scalpel and changing your anatomy. What did I do? Oh, I get it. No, what did I do? I'm curious what you think happened. What was my role in this? What did I do? What happened to your body? Nothing was put into it. Nothing was surgically changed. It was nothing from that medical viewpoint was done. What did I do? What happened in your body? And I don't care how badly they explain it, but I want them to put it into their own words. And then we can have a conversation about that, because I want them to understand what their body is capable of. I don't know what change these people are going to see either, but I, in all honesty, I've never had a cystic fibrosis case that didn't clear out like this. It's just maybe the next one won't. I don't know, because it's nonlinear. I really don't know. Are there other things that can affect our immune function besides the subluxation? Of course there are. But our input to the system is the subluxation. That's our job. No one else does that. There are people trying to do that, but they're not very good at it anyway. But that's our role. This is a pre and post adjustment of this is what BJ was doing in his final work, was the side posture toggle. And this is a pre and post adjustment of a C2, this second vertebra, entire segment right, ESR, that's what that means. So we're looking at 270 pairs of heartbeats. And I ran them through these algorithms, and all three of them increased as high as 66%. That is a massive, massive change in positive function in the entire body from an adjustment in one spot. It's absolutely incredible how the body functions. This isn't me. This is another chiropractor. I used him to do it. I ran the equipment on the person, but that's what this was. Now the red line is an EKG. You can see the P, the Q, the R, the S, and then the T wave here. So this is one full beat. And the blue line is what's called impedance cardiography. And what we're looking at from like the Q to this thing called a B notch, which is partway up this slope here in this blue. This area right here is in the blue line is a metric that's really, it's considered the very best sympathetic measure that's available. So with this equipment, I can do both of them at the same time. And from this Q to this B notch here is what's called the pre-ejection period. So that's when the pressure in the heart it's contracting and the pressure in the heart is building up, and it's before the aortic valve opens. The aortic valve opens here. So that's a pre-ejection period. The left ventricular ejection time is how much time it takes for that from this point forward for that ventricle to empty. So it's the timing of the aortic valve. So those are really good sympathetic measures. They use skin conduction, where they measure across a palm or where those are all valid, but none of them are as good as impedance cardiography. It's super accurate. And this is I didn't do this, but it was someone else's patient that we ran the data on. In a pre and post adjustment, we see a 26% change in impedance cardiography post adjustment. Well, that's a pretty dramatic a change.
Yeah.
A percent or two you could write off to, well, that's just a different thing. But you see a 26% change. That's dramatic. That's a really impressive. So we see the sympathetic function decrease post adjustment. It dropped 26%. So that fight or flight versus the rest and relax, the parasympathetic and the sympathetic sides of this, it shifted away from that fight or flight side. So that's a pretty impressive change, and it was one I had handy to put in here into the presentation. I have others, but I didn't want to take your entire day. This is a COVID-19 case, a pre and post adjustment. And we also see increases in all three measures post-adjustment. So what this means, and this is these are the size of the accuracy of the data can get drawn out to a very, very small fraction, of change. So what's interesting about the COVID cases is we hear how there's no data to suggest that chiropractic affects immune function. Well, number one, if the complexity improves post-adjustment, you don't have to measure immune function. Every system of the body, the function is improved through complexity analysis. It's how it works. You can't say, oh, it's everything except the immune function. Well, that's ridiculous. So just by running these three algorithms, we know that the complexity improves, the ability to resist entropy improves, and includes the neuroimmune system. So that's a dramatic thing to see, that a pre and post COVID case can see these changes. Now, right now at Life University, their researchers, their president of their school contacted me and asked me to hook one of their researchers up with a company that makes really good equipment and get some meetings going between them. And I did, I just facilitate and stayed out of the way and let them do their thing. But they ended up buying the same equipment I have, which is the very best stuff that's made out there. And this software that you see on the screen is as good as it possibly gets. And it's a great company that makes really great software. It's everything's kind of expensive. They have probably about $11,000 in just one thing that they bought with the software, and the other one is even more. So it adds up fast. But for a research place like a university, it's a great thing to have. So what they wanted to look at is these long COVID symptoms. Now, long COVID is when you have these symptoms for more than 14 days. So you have fatigue, headache, your attention and focus problems. You have hair loss, which a lot of us, you don't hear about that, but it's something that happens now. Dyspnea, anosmia, which is, of course, your ability to smell. They're in all of our communities. People are having these problems. There's a page on Facebook of parosmia with COVID. And I read it every day to see what people are dealing with, because we see these people and we need to have an understanding of what their lives are like, because it's tragic. So what Life wanted to do, and what they're doing right now, is they're taking people with long COVID and they're doing pre and post adjustments and looking at not just the symptomatic results that people report to them, but also variability measured with this equipment, which, like I said, it's the very best that's made in the entire world. And I don't, it's not my business to share their findings, but they have told me that they're seeing dramatic change in the symptomatic picture, but also in the heart rate variability, the body's ability to, and then now they're running that data through my website where they can run those complexity issues. And when we last spoke, she told me it's very promising. So this is an exciting thing. This is the first thing in chiropractic at a large scale that's been done that talks about the physiology of everything in your body improving with an adjustment. I mean, that's just so incredible. And it gets to what Dee Dee asked about. Why is this person still healthy?
Yeah.
And these algorithms allow us to answer that question after 112 years. About time. We're finally getting around to it. Now, this was done in Europe at Barcelona. This isn't the individual, but when someone tells me that internationally ranked triathlete, I don't know why it says athlete. It should say triathlete. This is what I picture. I know that's not what they look like, but I'm not one. So I always picture something I'm never going to be. So this person had no complaints, no symptoms, no known physiological anything. And as far as they were concerned, they were healthy and working perfect. As they said, they feel fine. So what the Center for Chiropractic Progress sent them a really nice, good EKG unit for the students to use in research there. And they wanted to test it, so they used it on this internationally ranked triathlete. And here's the screen. Now this shows you, let me see what we have here. I have to get down here and look. I apologize. We are looking at 219 beats here. Those little blue dots.
Yeah.
If we could zoom in on that, like the screen, and show you just one, like I did with the one, but this is what the EKG looks like. And these are all little R peaks, and the software puts dots on the peaks. And now if it's clean data, we can look over here in this side, and what it does, it cuts them all 219 of those apart and lays them next to each other. Look at how beautiful and smooth that is. There's not one beat that's an error in this entire strip, because we can repair it. We can go in and correct an error. If the computer makes an error, we can go in and fix it and put it where it needs to be and clean it up. But this is really beautiful data. It came this way. Wow. So we look at the before and after, and it does calculations down here in the corner. But looking ahead, so RMSSD is a parasympathetic impulse measure, the supply from that side. And we saw, what we found is they had a 97.4% increase post-adjustment. This is a triathlete. They're finely tuned. They think they're fine. There's nothing wrong with me at all. You show this to a triathlete, their mind's blown because they can't believe it. And remember, a 30% change is considered massive. And we're looking at a 97% change. I mean, that's off the charts. Yeah. Now, we're looking at like a frequency domain here. And what we pay attention to is up here in the corner is 117.95 high frequency RSA. And it was 117.95 pre. It was 389 post. Now, that's pretty dramatic. That's a 230% change. I don't even know what to say about that. That is one of the higher ones I've ever seen. And this isn't some sick person that's really, that you expect to see a huge change. And this is a finely tuned athlete that would run circles around any of us, and running, the swimming, the biking, the whole triathlete, you've got to be in shape for that. And if they're internationally ranked, they're a healthy specimen, but were they? So this is pretty massive. Yeah. So kind of cool. And I ran it through a couple of those metrics on the website, and we saw some very dramatic changes in their ability to resist entropy, their ability to their function in their body to be more complex, more able to adapt. I mean, that is a fantastic thing. When you think about we have golfers. I'm sure there are golfers everywhere. There's not a golfer that comes into my office that probably wouldn't sell their mother to cut a stroke off their game. You know what I mean? Just be a little bit better. And when you see someone who's a triathlete and you see these kind of changes, this is dramatic. This is absolutely incredible. But it's a fantastic thing. And it's something that we need not just one case of, but we need many cases put together, research studies done of this nature. So, so the entire body is functioning at a higher level, and that's pretty dramatic. Now, I mentioned before, I don't know how this slide got shoved down here, but this is the cystic fibrosis. So this is the graph they bring in. No, this isn't a graph they bring in. This is the percentage of kids with certain bacteria: Pseudomonas aeruginosa, Staph aureus, MRSA. These are the 7 or 6 that are tested for. In this study, they showed these 6, but there's 7 typically. And what you see over time with these kids is you'll see one bacteria, it's always there, and the rest of them are nothing. They're at the bottom. They're right at the bottom of that chart. And this isn't that kind of chart, but it shows some of the bacteria that are pretty common. And one kid can have a Staph aureus issue, and another kid in the group of people that the parents know, they have a Pseudomonas issue, but they don't have a Staph aureus problem. Why is it that this child's body with the same medical condition of cystic fibrosis can handle Staph aureus and this kid can't? And why can this kid handle Pseudomonas aeruginosa and this kid can't? Why is it, if it was really something where bacteria are the issue, why wouldn't all the bacteria cause a problem? Why is it? Could it be an identification issue? Their body, something is interfering with their ability to identify and deal with a certain bacteria. Well, that's the only thing that makes much sense. Again, it's just, those things that, COVID kind of put a halt on some of the things we were doing. We started in 2019 a bedwetting project. This was with Ett Kiropraktisk. I'm not one of them. I don't get involved in the research end. I clean the data and send it on. I don't look at it. I don't know what the pre and the post are. They're all numbered, so I don't know what anything is, but I don't know. So I clean it like on the screen you saw before, and I send it on. And these go to a PhD in Europe, actually, who's in charge of the project. And it kind of got halted, but we're talking about firing things up again. The problem is the ECGs that they were using, the company that made those specific ones has no longer supports them, and it works through their website. And so we have an issue with them even functioning the way they're supposed to right now. So we're trying to figure out the problem. Yeah, because they're not cheap, and I have 7 of them. So, I was kind of disappointed. We'll get it going again, though. It's not a problem. The cystic fibrosis study is designed and waiting. I want to get this other one done first, and I want to do something with that, testing with the bacterial levels, the pupillary light reflex and ECG together. And then we're going to do female infertility. We're looking at the pre and post first visit, and then periodically over 3 months of care that they're going to agree to go through to see what changes we see with female infertility. So interesting, and not the typical thing, not a back pain in there. We've got so many people looking at that. Do we need more of us looking at that? I don't think we really do. We've all seen a 5th lumbar study. If we're supposed to wait for research, 5th lumbar is safe. Have you ever seen a 4th lumbar study? Well, there's never been a 4th. So don't touch the 4th lumbar because we don't have any research. I mean, at what point do we just say this is getting a little silly? So, it all comes back to what Dee Dee was talking about. And, that whole idea of what we're about as chiropractors stems from that. And so, am I off sharing screen now? I don't know.
You're off sharing screen, yeah.
Okay, good. I'm sorry. Okay, great. Whew.
That was...
I have windburn. Sorry, it went a little bit long, but it's hard to pack up. I left a lot of things out I'd love to talk about, but
it's amazing stuff that you're doing. And it's staying adherent to the original why and the original questions and original principles of chiropractic, why it came about. And just like what science and the measurement tools that are available today that can show how we can actually have an impact on human physiology, improve it.
Absolutely.
It's
well,
amazing.
when you stop and think about it, when we heard was it April of last year or the year before? I can't remember. I think it was the year before that an organization in chiropractic said, well, we shouldn't talk about neuroimmune function because we don't have any studies. Well, they're in charge of research. So that means for 30 or 40 years, we've been giving them money for nothing. What are they doing? I mean, this is their responsibility. It's not my responsibility as a practitioner to be doing this work. But since there's this gaping hole that no one's filling, I'm just trying to develop some interest in it. And, when now that Life University in Georgia is moving in this direction at a pretty rapid rate with some very accurate things, like you can use I put it in front of me. You can use a smartphone and put your finger over the camera and it'll give you some information about heart rate variability. Yeah. But an iPhone, which has a pretty fast camera, you can take it to the Apple store and have one of their Apple geniuses, as they call them here. I don't know what they call them there, but they're the people there that really know Apple, and they'll fix things for you. They can super tune your camera and get about 65 or so frames per second. So what that means is that it's dividing that beat into 60 some slices. Wow. Now the standard today in heart rate variability is 250. So 250 hertz, 250 cycles per second that it's looking for that peak. Yeah. The chances of hitting a peak with this are about zero. As far as accurate. There's nothing wrong with people doing it out of our own interest. Yeah. But when we're going to publish research, we have to go to the standards, and the standards are 250 hertz. There's nothing that's iPhone compatible or anything like that that's going to get to that level of specificity. Yeah. The units I use, those 7 units that are having an issue right now, but we'll get it resolved. They're at 500 hertz, so they slice that beat into 500 slices. And I have 2 tabletop units that they're 1,000 slices per second. So, you're never going to miss a peak. So they're extremely accurate, and they're beautiful, beautiful data streams. Because if it takes a picture of that heartbeat, and it's 1 second is this long, and if we slice it 60 sometimes, the chance of hitting and catching the peak, so we know where the peak is, it might slice that peak off. So we think this is the peak down here because we never saw this, And so the data from it may not show how impressive chiropractic is. Yeah. And that's the danger. Everything that gets published in chiropractic that I've ever seen has never used high enough heart rate variability, or high enough hertz levels, high enough, that 250. We're just not there. Not to say that it doesn't have value, but we need to get ourselves to that point. But with the research we're doing, that we're using the very best equipment available, so that our results are not as open to question of what they mean. So. I'll stop talking now.
Great material, and I'm so grateful for your time.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
I do hope soon we will get you over here to Sweden as well, and can host you for an adaptability research where you.
I would love that. I was in Helsingborg some years ago, and. Yes, and I was there. I got there Friday, and I Friday night, and I left Sunday morning. So I didn't get to see much, but I was there for this kind of a purpose, to do this kind of thing. So, but it's a beautiful country. So
Stockholm is amazing. Although I'm from West Coast myself, but Stockholm is amazing. So it's beautiful. In the end, I like to ask the question. You already touched base on it all the way through. This presentation about how you see the future of healthcare and the future of chiropractic in the vision that you hold dear for the future of humankind, what we can offer, and healthcare in general.
Well, I'm excited for young graduates today and students, because they're starting 30 some years more into the future than I did. And I just think it's fantastic for them to have data, because when we didn't have this kind of research wasn't even thought of back then. So I think that it really depends on what we're going to do as chiropractors. Are we going to, use a limited approach where we're kind of what I would call a narrow application, where, chiropractic, we just are looking at low back pain or headaches or whatever. And that's such a minimalistic approach. And science is showing that since we're nonlinear, to not consider the physiology of the entire body it's not a scientific way of even approaching what health means. And what our existence means, because we're here because of our ability to adapt. The moment we stop, we're no longer on this side of the soil, so to speak. So we, where we're going to go really depends upon where things are going. I'm very excited to see chiropractic research heading in this direction. It's been a long path and a lot of frustration to see it starting. But it is starting. And I think just for instance, as Life starts to publish some of the things they're doing, other researchers in our profession are going to see this and think, we need to really look at this closer. And, as that starts to happen, I think it's going to have a groundswell of interest. And our profession would support research much more financially if they were doing things that reflected what you do in practice and what I do in practice and what we see and what the experience of the typical patient is in our practice. If they take that into consideration in designing their research questions and things they might want to look at, we've all seen things in practice that we scratch our heads and go, wow, I didn't give that person a chance. In my mind, I thought, oh boy, this is uphill. And they prove me stupid every time. So the body's amazing. And it just depends of whether we want to see that narrow application or a broad application, which is, viewing it from a side of health or viewing it from a side of, fighting disease. Because, we heard people I'm sure in your country as well as mine, oh, we're fighting COVID. You can't fight COVID. It doesn't work like that. I mean, that's just such a silly statement for anyone in science to make, that you're fighting a disease. It's absurd. You put on a cape and you grab a sword and you fly into battle against a virus. I mean, it just isn't the point. Why did someone, me, I had COVID, didn't have a single symptom. And I know the symptoms. We were all very familiar with them. Never had a symptom. I wouldn't be in my office if I knew I had a symptom. Never had a fever, never had a scent thing, nothing. Everything was perfectly fine. I only found out because it was a year and a half ago or so, I donated blood. And they told me, well, you can go online and, see what your results were. I'm like, well, I didn't have it. I know the symptoms and everything. And I went up a couple of weeks later and thought, well, I should at least look. And I looked. I'll be damned if I wasn't antibody positive. I never had a single. Why do I skate through it this easily? Why? It's because there's only one scientifically logical reason. My ability to adapt to the presence of that virus and deal with it was more efficient than other people. A different virus might come along and it might be the opposite for me. Like those children that have that tested for those 7 bacteria. Why that bacteria in that child and why that bacteria in that child? Why? It's our body's ability to deal with it and become stress resilient, because that virus is a stressor. There's physical stresses, chemical stresses, psychological stresses. We all deal with them. And this COVID area, the psychological side's been very high for people. It was a very stressful time. Canada still can't really go anywhere unless you're fully vaccinated and everything. Those people can't even leave and go back. It's such a mess. I'm not picking on Canada, but I'm just saying I'm familiar with Canada. Time is going to favor our philosophy. There's not a doubt about it. Where our position is, the things Dee Dee talked about, that disease is not an entity. It's not a thing of enmity. It's not a thing you can fight because it's not a thing. That darkness in the dark room, you don't come in and attack the darkness. You turn up the light. That's the way the body works in that same, analogy, in that sense. As long as we can adapt better and we can show that people adapt better under chiropractic care or due to chiropractic care, I think that's a fantastic future for our profession. I hope we can wrap our brains around it and, be able to communicate it to the public so they see the real value of what we provide as chiropractors, what the body is capable of.
Yeah.
So Don't know if that answered your question. Probably more.
Yeah, it did. Yeah, wrapping it up nicely. Yeah, I mean, trusting innate intelligence when we can identify where's the interference on the nervous system through the chiropractic analysis and address it through the adjustment, specific adjustment, then things happen, and it's not really up to us to know what that innate intelligence is, to cherish it.
Right, exactly. Well, someone could have a headache because they have a tumor behind their eye.
Yeah.
So, for chiropractic that want to get rid of headaches, I don't know if that's necessarily a job we want to have anyway, because I would want my headache to get more intense so that I look into it deeper and try to find an answer than to say, oh, I don't feel it anymore and just let it continue to grow. I mean, that's not our job, isn't to get rid of pain. No. The body pain is a signal. It's a warning of transgression, that something is going on. And to eliminate that is to put a plastic bag over the top of our smoke detectors in our homes and then go to sleep and say, well, that noise was driving me crazy, so I covered it up and now let's go to sleep. I mean, that's nuts, but that's our healthcare. That's what we do as a humanity. So to change that in people is difficult, especially, now with now they're seeing that, the COVID thing, that's, you don't need a vaccine, you need 2, then you need a booster, then you need whatever. And then people still get it. So, you kind of have to scratch your head and as the public and start to wonder, well, how could they be so wrong about this? And, not that I'm the COVIDologist or anything like that, but the thing is that, we can see these cases where people with COVID that are adjusted, that their body functions at a more complex level. They have a higher level of stress resilience, and immune function is absolutely a part of that. So that it all ties. There's no, you can't give an adjustment that affects only the kidney. It doesn't work like that. Why does a woman have a kidney infection in her left kidney and then another one and another one? It's never in the right kidney. Because there's a weakness in that left kidney, unless there's a left-handed kidney bacteria that can only get off in the left kidney. I mean, that's absurd. But what do they do medically? They give them a drug. The problem is in the lack of drugs in the bloodstream. That's not why you have headaches. That's not why you have kidney infections. And I'm not saying they shouldn't do that or should do that. That's not my business. But from our perspective as chiropractors, I'm more interested in if there's an interference to the community of control in the body that protects that kidney, in that sense, what I mean? Something in the body that's a kilted, that's off balance, something that's not right, that we can make a change with. The same thing with a child with ear infections. Oh yeah, well, it's same ear, yep, same ear, yep, same ear, yep, same ear. Well, then how is an antibiotic going to know which ear to go to? Yeah. You know what I mean? Does it leave the other one alone? And it just doesn't make a lot of sense from a cause perspective, that it's a lack of drugs. A lack of drugs isn't the cause of our problem. There's something bigger. Sometimes it's because they let something go for 3 or 4 decades, and now you need oxygen. And I don't care how good of a chiropractor you go to, they're probably, they may very well need oxygen forever because the damage has been done. And, unless they can live 500 years, they probably can't live long enough for tissue repair, I don't know, but it's, if we can understand what we are as chiropractors, what makes us different, and explain that to our communities so that they see the obvious value in what we do. I've been under care. This year is 40 years that I've been under care. I've never gone more than 14 days without getting checked. I don't always need to be adjusted. Sadly, as I'm getting older, more common that I do need to be adjusted, but it happens. But I've never missed a day of work in my entire working life. I've never missed a single day. I don't know. I'm not saying that chiropractic is the only reason for that, but I'm not one of these people that's in the gym. I'm not one of these people that says, no, I can't eat that donut. I'm going to eat that donut. Sorry. I like them. So, I break a few rules of health as people put them, but, there are people that we saw in this last issue with COVID that did everything right. They ate right. They had the proper amount of whatever they're putting in their body and the exercise and all that stuff, and they're no longer with us. So, that can't be the answer to everything. You know, there's got to be a reason. Why is it that that virus they couldn't handle? They've lived through, 100 colds. They've had the flu. They've had all these different things. Why this virus? What is the problem they had with this virus? And it has to be an identification issue. There are, we can do a whole thing on immune function and COVID, but it's just, we all saw this. The entire public of the world saw how, we haven't found that answer through everything, all the billions of dollars that was spent in medical research trying to find this answer to fight the virus. And we haven't, everybody still had to have the damn virus. So, obviously it didn't work too well. So, if they would have spent, 0.001% of that money in chiropractic research, they may have found some other answers, because if they would have had those people with COVID adjusted, they very well might have found what we found with these other cases, that their complexity improved, that, things are improving for people. Their immune function's better. I don't really know.
Interesting questions to be.
That's it. Questions. I just have more. I'm a philosophy guy. I just have more questions.
And that's it, to keep an open mind and stay in the question a while.
Yeah.
Stay in the why.
That's right. That's right.
So Rob, if people want to get hold of you, can you say your email address?
Sure. It's chirobooks, CHIROBOOKS at.
I will be putting it beneath there as well.
Okay. And it's at sbcglobal.net. So it's Sam Boy Charlie Global GLOBAL.net. And also Facebook. I mean, if they're on Facebook and they send me a message with a question, I'm happy to answer it as I can. So I don't know the answers to everything, but anything I know, I'm glad to share, because this isn't about me. This is about the future of the profession. And that's all I care about. So
yes. Thank you so much for your time. And I highly, again, recommend your book. I mean, Human Adaptability, and the question that's in there, and the research you go through about how we can measure it, and kinds of intervention. A quest to optimize the trajectory of life and living, I would say. Yeah,
that's right.
Wonderful.
Well, we see in the Ukraine with what's going on, they'll launch a missile and they know exactly where it's going to land.
Yeah.
Because that missile's not alive. If it could adapt, it could change its course.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? So that optimizing that trajectory, that's what it's all about, is allowing us to adapt better so we could change that trajectory and take it further for people. I mean, I think that being alive is one thing. But living is one thing. I just don't want to be alive. I want to live. You know what I mean? I want to have a full experience for my whole time here. And I think that's something that chiropractic can offer people, that in a way that no other profession can even consider. So, it's a great opportunity to speak to the fantastic chiropractors of Europe and beyond. And I appreciate the opportunity to bloviate for 2 hours.
Oh, well, it's my pleasure and my honor. And I'm looking forward again to talk to you soon again, and continuation to get you over here to Stockholm as well.
Oh, great. Well, please do stay in touch, and thank you very much.
That's for sure. Thank you. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.
And the recording here.
Good deal.